Thank you for tuning in to Set Your Mind podcast. I recently was talking to a friend and she thought the name was confusing. And so I gave her a little bit of the history and the background of Set Your Mind and how I came up with the name and the whole theme of the podcast. She told me, why don't you do a video about Set Your Mind, why it's important and what it means? So here's my story, and thanks for tuning in. What if there truly are no limitations? What if miracles are possible? How do we live in that arena? Only when you set your mind. So the first day of filming Set Your Mind podcast, I was a little nervous. I woke like I often do at 3 a.m. This time when I woke, I thought Mark 8:33. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. What is that scripture? Instead of immediately getting up, I laid back down, thought about maybe I should go back to sleep, decided to wake up, heard it again, or thought it again. Mark 8:33. So at this point, I'm walking to the couch where I read the word, where I pray and have my quiet time with God. Mark 8:33. I'm like, what is that scripture? And it's so clearly Mark 8:33. So let me share that scripture with you, which is the premise of my podcast. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." I literally read that scripture and so much understanding rushed in, feeling that, oh my gosh, that's what I'm for and what I'm against. Ultimately, whenever we have a life message, we have something that we're for and something that we're against, something we're fighting for and something that we're fighting against. And I immediately knew what I am for is the mindset of God, the things that are higher perspective, the mindset that is set on his nature. And what I'm against is the status quo. I'm against the mindset of just the common world mindsets that are actually crippling to creativity and building and growth. This scripture of all scriptures is one that provokes me more than any other scripture, mostly because I consider this not a sin. Peter literally says to Jesus, I don't want you to go to the cross. I don't want you to suffer. And Jesus says and Jesus's response to that is, "Get behind me, Satan." So I've read that scripture before and thought, wow, I really don't get it, because that doesn't seem like a sin. I don't understand what Jesus is talking about. Fast forward this filming, this podcast, I feel like I finally understand it. And and it's interesting because in Mark, it says that he turned to the disciples and rebuked Peter. So I felt like Peter actually was the leader of the disciples. He was the only one that had the courage to just say something. But it was really the sentiment of the entire group that Jesus was addressing when he said, "Get behind me, Satan." I believe Jesus was saying, you are in line with the culture of the day. You are in line with the world perspective on life. And actually, God's perspective is higher. His ways are higher. So get behind me, Satan, for you are focused on the things of man, not on the things of God. And that's what this whole podcast is about. Setting your mind on the things that God has for you. Let's dive deeper into what I believe that means. Because truthfully, how do you set your mind? How do we engage with God and our mind? So I don't necessarily feel like we say set your mind actually ever. We maybe say think about things in a different way, or have a higher perspective, or imagine things a certain way, or frame your focus a certain way. put your mind in a certain way. I don't necessarily think we ever say in American culture, set your mind, which is why it makes it a little awkward. But I believe that setting something, like what do we set? We set a table, or we set our focus, or we set our gaze on something. So we are actually setting our mind. And if I'm going to dive deeper into that, I think it's worth navigating through what it is that puts our mind in a space at all. Why do we need to set our mind? And how do we set our mind? So there are 3 major inputs that I want to discuss today. The first is the heart. The heart is the place where we have emotions and longings, and our desires are living in that space. And our heart is it's the one space, it's the one input that really, we have to guard it because it can be hurt, and we have to nurture it, and we have to make sure that we care for our heart. Our heart can easily be wounded from trauma, from abuse, and things of that nature. So the heart is super, super important. Your heart matters. And my family, we actually have this saying. We say that if something doesn't feel right, that it violates our hearts. And you can violate your heart. You can wound your heart, and you can violate your heart. So the heart is something that definitely brings in input to your brain, and it will give you certain mindsets. So your heart can be corrupted, but your heart can also be pure. So, there's the story of King David, and he says, "Examine my heart, God, and create in me a pure heart." That is something that we can do. I think that that's a space where we're invited into communing with God and bringing our hearts before Him. Now, the other 2 inputs that I want to discuss are our environment, which is really just the space that we live in. The space that we live in, be that your family, you might be somebody that is a class mom or a business leader. These are all environments, and we have roles in our environments, and those roles will create mindsets. Meaning, so if I'm sick in the hospital, my mindset might be complete chaos because that role of patient is a new space for me. When we go into new arenas and new spaces, our mindset often has to adapt. That's why I think a lot of people will hire a coach when they are in a new space, because we're insecure in new spaces and roles. That will be one source of input for our minds. And then another, and what I think the biggest source of input for our minds, is culture. We have culture, which the definition of culture is the customs, the arts, the social institutions, and achievements of a social group, nation, or a people. So that's really like the overarching mindset of those different arenas. And when you are in a different arena, like there's mindsets for poverty mindset, middle class mindset, wealth mindset, there's Southern culture mindset, there's so many different cultures. Your family may have its own culture. And all of those things can actually be conducive to having bad mindsets because we adhere to a mindset that's cultural instead of one that is one with God and what God has intended for our lives. So those are the 3 inputs: heart, environment, and culture. And all of those will shape our mindset. That story with Peter probably touched on all 3 of those areas of input for your mindset. If you look at Peter, just before that verse of "Get behind me, Satan," Jesus had identified Peter as the rock that he would build his church on. And he had been proud of Peter for knowing that he was the Messiah. And he said, don't tell anybody. But Peter, I think, had a lot of confidence, maybe more than the other disciples, to even be able to address Jesus and tell Jesus, no, not you. In that scene, Peter was probably just trying to love Jesus the best he knew. And the best he knew was to say, no, I don't want you to suffer. I love you. No. And so it looked really good. That was very much his heart, I think. And then in terms of his environment, if you'll look at Peter and Jesus, we're looking at a Jewish culture. We're looking at who Peter has decided and believes to be the Messiah. Well, Peter believed that the Messiah had a certain role that was to be played out. Peter didn't imagine that the role was going to mean a cross and suffering. He couldn't really put himself in that understanding. And then in terms of culture, the cross represented a curse. It represented something where criminals are hung. And the Messiah wasn't supposed to be identified with criminals and suffer a gruesome death. So really, Peter was coming at Jesus from those three different inputs and responding to the inputs that he considered love. He was trying to support Jesus, yet Jesus's response was, get behind me, Satan. And I don't even necessarily know that he was saying it to Peter as much as he was saying it to the entire group. Okay, so when we have preconceived mindsets because of environment or because of culture, and we really truly believe that this is good, how do we get out of that space? How do we ever find out that the way that we've been thinking our whole lives is incongruent with what God has for us, which is actually the best path there is? We often will play it safe when God will say, I want you to live a life of faith. I want you to live a life that's bigger than you can dream or imagine, because that's where the fullness of life is. So how do we get out of that mindset? Well, we have to set our minds. We have to take action to recalibrate the way that we think and make it one that is congruent with the way that God thinks. So I have 3 ways that you can set your mind. One is with truth. I have 2 stories where I had to reset my mind because I have such a performance mentality. I have such a performance culture that I grew up in. My dad was a collegiate swimmer. He was, very accomplished in the academia world. But what that meant for me was that I had so much test anxiety and I would lose my breath when I would public speak. I was so afraid of performance. And I had to actually come against all the fear that I was experiencing in those scenarios with truth. Now, a lot of people will say, you got to use the Bible. But to be honest, I just used my parameter was love. What does love in the situation look like? If the word says absolute love casts out fear, what does it look like to love myself in these situations where I am crippled with fear? So in order to be able to public speak, the script in my head was, I'm going to die. I want to die. I don't want to be here. I want to die. I would rather die. If I could just leave here, I would die. I mean, it was so extreme, but that is literally what I used to say. And I had to flip that script. I had to identify that that was not going to be conducive to me being able to public speak. And then I would literally say, people want to hear what I have to say. It's amazing what I have to say. This is such a good experience for them. Everybody loves listening to me. And that's literally what I did. I was able to public speak because I flipped it to love. The second way that you can set your mind is listening to other stories or becoming aware of a higher purpose or a higher call or a higher reality. So my story with that is I was in a very abusive work environment. I was so depressed and my mindset was so downcast. I went to this movie about it was like war in Africa. I think it was like child soldier war. And it totally flipped my mind from being self-consumed and being woe is me victim in this horrible work environment to, oh, there's bigger problems in the world. Like that, like hearing that testimony really helped me. Or even if you're sick, you could hear a testimony of somebody who actually has been healed or had an incredible experience with the same disease or a similar disease. And testimonies really strengthen us, and they really help us when we learn that other people have been through similar things, or even that other people have bigger fish that they're frying and your fish is not that big. Chill out. Don't worry. And my last, and honestly, I think the hardest way to set your mind, but so critical, is surrender. This is something that I'm still learning. I'm constantly learning, and I'm constantly having to remind myself that I am to surrender. And when I surrender to God, who loves me, to love Himself, Jesus Christ, I literally know that I'm going to be okay, and I'm not carrying the weight of whatever's in front of me. When I surrender and I give the burdens over, this is the way that I have learned is the best way to really elevate your mindset, because you're not taking it on. You're not trying to control. Actually, before I drove over to record today, literally I'm thinking that the ultimate is freedom. It's freedom for all of us. It's freedom from these scenarios that bog us down. It's freedom from believing lies that will cripple us. We want to believe truth that sets us free. So I just hope that you will gain from this teaching that the principles and the tools that you need to really be set free and be set on a path where you can set your mind on the things that will set your life in place of freedom and abundance and blessing. Be blessed, my friends, and thanks for tuning in.